Grub Street lodger, and over a year ago now, I went for a little walk around London. And as I walked around London, I filmed various places and locations and things that I thought might make some interesting videos, just some little informative ones. The idea was to create kind of a walking tour of things I'm interested in London. And the trouble is, I'm not very good with cameras, and most of the stuff I filmed is utter rubbish, and so I just put it aside. But now that I have the urge to go out and walk about, and alas cannot, I thought it might actually be worth digging up some of that manky old footage and showing you a few things. And today we're going to start with a big one. We're going to start with Grub Street. Welcome to Grub Street. This is it. It is a street. It's not a very big street. It's not a very important street. It's not even called Grub Street anymore. It's called Milton Street because the name Grub Street had such a bad reputation. Originally, it was a street of bowyers. Bowyers, I'm going to go with. People who made bows, because it was a legal requirement to practice your longbow technique, and the fields were archery butts close by. And it was cheap rent, and as time went on, authors started moving in, and because it was close to the main publishing places, which were around St Paul's Cathedral and a street called Little Britain. And so authors started moving in. The most famous author who definitely lived on Grub Street was Fox, who wrote Fox's Book of Martyrs. This means by the time we got to the 18th century, Grub Street had this name as being a place where cheap authors lived, hack writers. If you've seen this picture here, and to be honest, if you're interested in any of these kind of things, you're going to see this picture here a lot. I have about 20 books, all with this as its front cover. This is a Grub Street author. He is a Grub Street hack. He's sitting there, he's scratching his head under his wig, trying to work out what to do. Behind him is a map of Peru and all the gold mines, because that's what he'd rather be doing. Also behind him is a wailing baby. There's a full chamber pot, of course, some cats, and an angry landlady. And that's Grub Street. That's the Grub Street myth, the myth of the hack indigent writer. And that's why this channel is called the Grub Street Lodger, because I am fairly indigent and a bit hacky. I am a Grub Street lodger, a Grub Street author, in my own way. And so this is where that whole stereotype of the author in their little ratty garret comes about. And it's a stereotype that still kind of lives. I mean, have a look. Look where I am. I am in the top of a house. I am in my ratty garret. And there's a lot of books that have been written about it. See that picture? I've got quite a few. Ned Ward, he's very interesting. Women of Grub Street. I've got all sorts of books. I've got another one coming through the post soon, actually. Another Women of Grub Street type one. And it's a really interesting thing because, well, for a start, there weren't that many authors lived on Grub Street. People from outside of London used to come to London and visit to try and see all these exotic authors, and there was no one there, which I find brilliant because they just lived around that area. But much as Fleet Street became papers, Grub Street became cheap authors. I mean, some of these people really did live quite terribly. There was one author who, well, he used to drink away all of his earnings, and he didn't get that many earnings anyway. So he'd raffle and pawn away his coat and such like to buy gin. And he was known to spend most of the week in a blanket with a hole cut out because he didn't have any other clothes. And then he'd reclaim his clothes to go out on Sundays, and then he'd pawn them back again and go back under his blanket and keep writing. And the reason they go out on Sundays is because you weren't allowed to be arrested for debt on a Sunday. And so there are certain kinds of people known as Sunday men who could only come out on a Sunday, which I find quite hilarious. But there you go. One of the other myths is evil booksellers. The myth that someone like Edmond Cole, would have a fleet of their hack writers in Grub Street and pay them pittance and keep them on a tight rope. Now, Newbery certainly did look after some of his authors' finances. He looked after goldsmiths, and Goldsmith thanked him for it, to be honest. He also looked after Christopher Smart's, and Christopher Smart was married to Newbery's stepdaughter. But there's also theories that Newbery arranged for him to be put in a madhouse because he was such an embarrassment and bad with money. So who knows what really went on there? Though I don't particularly agree with this. I don't think Newbery would have cared enough to got Smart back. But there you go. As said Edmond Cole, he was a famous Grub Street publisher. He actually, again, not on Grub Street, but the name sticks. And he there's a brilliant book I've got of him called The Unspeakable Curl, and he used to publish these biographies. And what he'd do is he'd stake a claim in the paper saying, "I am writing a biography of such and such. It is already written and commissioned. If you have any other information and you want to, add it to it, please write to me." And then he'd sit for a week and he'd gather all this stuff that people sent him, and then he'd write it out of that. And if nothing came through, he'd just use the legal documents like their will and stuff. The wills are usually in them. And in fact, it was described as a new terror unto death. Dying had a new terror because Edmond Cole might write your autobiography and do it really badly. Or not him, he'd commission someone. So this is a genuine Edmond Cole life that I bought. The life and character of Mr. John Phillips, written by Mr. Sewell. As you can see, the covers and that aren't there. Second edition, printed for E. Cole at the Dial and Bible against St. Dunstan's Church in Fleet Street. So Fleet Street again. 1715. And this is a very quickly knocked together life of this man called Mr. John Phillips, who wrote a couple of poems and cider. And so it copies some of the poems and has some opinion on it and a little bit of life, but that is about it. And then we get to the end, and here's the bit that made him famous, made Cole famous. Here it is. Things like this. It's what's written on his gravestone. He'd just bulk it out. The other thing Cole did, which I find wonderful, is that if he published one of these and then got a bit more information, he'd republish it under a different title as if it was a completely different thing, encouraging people to buy it again and again. I really love Cole. He's one of my favourite characters. He seems like a proper Del Boy-esque wheeler-dealer kind of guy. And he has this terrible reputation. The only picture of him that exists is him as a two-faced man. But I don't know. I mean, Pope hated him. But Pope also used him, because Cole published some of Pope's letters. And it's very, very possible that Pope engineered it so Cole did it, so that he wouldn't be seen as self-aggrandizingly publishing his own letters. He also gave Pope also gave Cole a laxative, and found that very funny and wrote a poem about it. Cole was also beaten up by Eton schoolboys, and so was his son. Anyway, so yeah, Cole is he's one of many people who are part of this legend of Grub Street, the legend of the penniless writer. And let it not be forgotten. People like Samuel Johnson and Oliver Goldsmith were themselves hacks who lived in this area and wrote for money. And if it wasn't for people like that, we wouldn't have the literature we have now. It was the hacks, it was the Grub Street hacks who developed newspapers and journalism, even agony aunt columns, cookery columns, the novel. A lot of hacks hacked into the novel. It was a term of offence. It's now probably forgotten, pretty much. Lives on best in the George Gissing book, New Grub Street. And I find that for some of us, for example myself, living now, we serve our own sort of Grub Street times, but online. And this is where we write for very small amounts of money, and we have to write quickly and just try and get it down. And it's ephemeral. You read it on a blog one day, and that's it. You never need it again. That's the modern life of the modern Grub Street hack. So yeah, that's my first little trip, my first ramble. These were going to be a lot tighter, these videos, but I quite like having a ramble. I hope you don't mind listening. That was a trip to Grub Street.